Welcome back to the HRE4M audio series. Today we're going to start talking about Chapter 7, which is the beginning of Unit 3. So just a quick recap for you. Unit 3 will consist of Chapters 7, 8, and 9. Much like Units 1 and 2 consist of Chapters 1, 2, and 3 for Unit 1, and then 4, 5, and 6 for Unit 2. So we see this unit kind of shift gears again. So in the previous unit, we talked about the church, the history of the Catholic faith, and how that development has augmented and tried to reinforce certain ethical standards and moral actions within followers and people who are embracing the Christian faith, which, again, just as a quick aside, mirror and mimic most of the ethical standards and moral actions that are in place across the world's religions. Okay, um, what we're looking at here in Chapter 7, and you'll see as you go through the chapter notes and do your research notes, or you go through the chapter and you're answering the questions in the research notes. Um, we're looking at this idea of the good life and happiness. So instead of looking at this overarching just concept of the good, which we addressed in chapter 1 with the three philosophers, Aristotle, um, Kant, and Levinus, again, tomato, tomato, how you want to pronounce it. We're now looking at a much more concrete application, if you will, rather than an abstraction in the sense of the good life for the individual and happiness, in the sense that this discussion is now going to move into looking at how we are quite literally living the good life and how we are happy. Now, those two terms kind of come preloaded with a lot of biases and preconceptions about what that means. And I'm sure each and every one of you, after hearing the good life and happiness, have already tweaked to certain ideas or ideologies or concepts, etc. Um, this chapter really tries to drive that focus back towards something very much rooted in an ethical and moral kind of domain, if you will. So this chapter introduces us to two new philosophers, Plato and St. Thomas Aquinas. The reason these two philosophers get introduced, because they're also going to work in conjunction with Aristotle, Kant, and Levinus, is because their philosophies very much align with a Catholic Christian perspective of and our understanding of what the good life and happiness should be. Okay. Um, for Plato, the closest we come to the good, and you've heard this discussion already in chapter 1 when we talked about Aristotle, Kant, and Levinus and their perceptions of the good. For Plato, it's contemplation. Um, in other words, we bask in the good. It enters into our being through our knowing. So now it's very much uh, an understanding, if you will, an attempt to, um, engage in that philosophical mindset to understand what the good is, the good life is, um, and the fact that it's through reason that we are able to contemplate the good, which is the highest form of the good, if you will, is that ability to engage in reason and logic uh, to to try to understand it. Because when we understand it or we know it, it in turn becomes a lived reality for the individual, for each of us. Okay. Um, again, I'm trying to give you a quick snapshot here. You're more than the text does a pretty good job of concisely consolidating that material as well. but again, feel free to use other sources to expand that or ask, as usual. If you got questions, you're not sure about something, email me. There's what you're going to find for Aristotle, Kant, and Levinas are quick reviews of their theories in the text. I'm not going to go over those again because you've already heard that in chapter 1, and they're really, the textbook does a better job than I could, and I don't think you really want to listen to me read it to you, so I'm going to leave that. What I'm going to jump to is St. Thomas Aquinas. Again, interestingly, what you need to notice, and I mentioned this when talking about Aristotle, Kant, and Levinas, for each of these philosophers, their theories, or his theories, are really kind of rooted in their life experiences at the time that they lived. And that has some impact in trying to get a better handle on understanding what they stand for and why those theories appear when they do. This isn't done in a vacuum. These theories evolve and grow as humanity's evolved and grown. Okay? So when you look at Thomas Aquinas, you see somebody who believed that people were made for happiness. In other words, we were created by God to be happy. And that the ethical is really inscribed in, according to Aquinas, the end that is inscribed in the nature of all creatures. What something is for is placed at the very core of what something is. So at our core, the very core of a person is the desire for good. In other words, we are built to be good people. We are not intentionally made to be quote unquote bad or to do things that are wrong. And again, that's a deeper philosophical debate about sin, which we'll get into in a later unit. We talked about sin earlier on and its view as a transgression. But you can see where this starts to come full circle again. So what you have to recognize is that for Aquinas, it's understanding our core. It's an introspective exercise, if you will, or need for us to recognize introspectively that at our core, excuse me, sorry about that, we desire good. We desire to be happy. And it's the things that go on in our lives, or the occasions, in this case from Aquinas' perspective, for sin, that drive us into situations where we're committing acts or working from unethical perspectives with the belief that that's what makes us happy. That, he believes we have it within ourselves through, the gift that God has given us, the gift of life, the gift of free will, to embrace that what we're built for. We're built to be good. We're built to be happy. We're not built to be unhappy or to be less than good. And Aquinas does recognize, the textbook doesn't talk about it in great detail, but Aquinas does recognize it's a struggle, and it takes effort and work on our part to get to that. Okay. The other key thing he presents is when he mentions successful living, and he talks about traits or 4 virtues that you need to embrace, and they are prudence, temperance, fortitude, and justice. Which prudence, how to reason well, or how to think well with moral decision making. Temperance, how to remain moderate in the exercise of emotion or anything, the exercise of anything, if you will. Fortitude, how to be courageous when facing life's difficulties, facing failure, facing anything that is going to test you. And the last one is justice, which is how to act well in relation to others. Those 4 quote unquote cardinal virtues, if you will, are examples of what he believes are the key to successful living, the key to living the good life and being happy. Okay. Uh, what you're then going to see as you go through the chapter after you deal with those is um, this the subheading is 3 ways of pursuing the good, and it'll mention like natural ethics, teleological ethics, um, which you know Aquinas embraced, um, deontological ethics, the idea of obligation, and then the last one is the impact of the gospel. So now you start to see that as we move forward in these new units, this inclusion of the teachings of Christ as a way to augment or better get a handle on our ethics and morality. Now that, again, is not to say that for Muslims, Buddhists, Jews, any of the other global religions you're going to come across, these people aren't adhering to a similar moral code or ethical set of standards simply because they don't use the Gospels. Okay. The text then, the rest of the text really kind of tries to break down for you what makes for a good and happy person. And you're going to come across a bunch of subheadings and then sub-subheadings. And really you want to break them down. There's the first one is the standards of excellence for the good life. And that gets kind of broken down into 3 parts real quickly. There isn't a recipe to follow, which I know is going to sound weird to say, and the way the book presents it is maybe a little jarring or disconnecting. There isn't a one right way to do this. There isn't one default way to pursue the good life and be happy. It's almost the pathways are as unique and as varied and as plentiful as human beings are in their personalities. And that's kind of the best way to put it. The next one is standards of excellence. In other words, there's a high bar you need to try to hit, and I say try to hit because it's something that it's a daily exercise to try to live the good life and be happy. It is not a one and done thing, and then you're forever going to be happy or live the good life. All right, and those you need to kind of live up to those standards. The last one is the study of practice and the study and not of and practice of virtue. In other words, Aquinas mentioned those kind of 4 cardinal virtues. Those are something that needs to have a daily involvement in your life. It's something that you need to recognize that it goes back to those standards. It goes back to that no recipe, how you keep that virtue in the forefront of your mind when you're acting or thinking or trying to get through life in a way that's going to allow you to be happy and feel that you are living a good life. The next sections of that get into this idea of temperance and chastity. Chastity is really self-mastery. I know that term comes up a lot when we talk about the integration of sexuality within a person. That is only one aspect of chastity. Chastity is self-mastery. It's learning to master yourself across the board. And one way of learning to do that is by exercising the virtue of temperance, is learning to mitigate your responses, your actions. Try to stick to that kind of middle path that Aristotle introduced. That idea of, if you remember from grade 11 religion, and the Buddha talked about the middle road, the middle path, the middle way. It's philosophically, it's the same thing. It's about embracing not extremes, but a balanced middle, reasonable, rational approach. And in doing so, one is able to gain a firm grip on chastity, on self-mastery. And when that happens, you're then able to embrace the next kind of major section, which is this idea of the role of the other, which again I've kind of mentioned in other units and other chapters. This is not something done in a vacuum. We live in a world with other people. We are social creatures. We are social beings, and therefore our ethical and moral development is as much part of our interactions with others as it is what we do on our own or what we ourselves think of it. So you look at this, this concept of friendship, and that, this frank and unhesitating opening of one's heart and mind to someone. Um, that at its core is what friendship is. And friendship can take various forms. It can embrace various levels of intimacy. And yet, um, it's something that does really attune itself to the good life and being happy, because your friends, your family are part of that. Those friendships are part of that, and we need to recognize that. We need to embrace that idea of temperance and chastity, not only for ourselves but for all of our friendships. If I know myself well enough, I know what I will and won't tolerate within friendships. And that makes me a better friend, not just because I know myself better, but I know myself well enough to know what I would like from my friends. And my friends, people respond better to that because then they know themselves what the expectations are, if you will, the standards. And then the last kind of element that the chapter embraces is the good life needs just institutions. In other words, while we don't do this alone, and our friends, our relationships play a huge part in that deeper connection of understanding the good life and being happy, it also gets reinforced in the world that we live in through the institutions that we're part of, that we partake of, that we regularly engage in, because they also play a role in helping reinforce those standards, reinforcing that temperance, reinforcing that chastity, through, again, viable relationships with where you work, the kind of social activities you and your friends engage in through either organized or house league sports, clubs, you name it. All of that provides that fertile ground that helps shape the good and happy person you're going to be, or can hinder that and make you unhappy or feel that you're not living the good life. So that's, again, it for chapter 7. As usual, don't hesitate to ask me any questions. Reach out to me if you're not sure about something. And as always, until the next chapter, have a great day.